A couple of years ago, I invested in my first ever plunge saw from Parkside, which works pretty well actually, and has opened up new ways of cutting material for me. However, recently my friends from ITS said, Stuart, do you fancy borrowing one of our Makita 36v all singing all dancing plunge saws to see how you get on with it? So today I'm going to be showing you what extra you get when you pay a lot more money for your plunge saw and asking the question, do you really need it? And a bit of a spoiler alert, now I've tried it, I don't want to give it back. This video is sponsored by ITS for all the tools you need, who have lent me this plunge saw to see how I get on with it and for me to sort of try it out and give you some feedback. This is the Makita DSP-601, which I think has been on the market maybe for a year now, maybe even a bit longer, but is the current 36 volt Makita plunge saw that you'll see in the shops. And as it's 36 volts, it's obviously powered by two 18 volt batteries. And you need two batteries to be able to use it. You can't use it on one battery and get half the running time. You need two full batteries. And for something like this, you're probably better off using one of the bigger 4 or 5 amp hour batteries for sure. It's got all the standard features you'd expect from a plunge saw and can carry out bevel cuts up to 48 degrees off of plumb. It's got an adjustable speed brushless motor that goes from 2,500 to 6,300 RPM. And apparently has Makita's automatic torque drive technology, although when I've been using it I've not noticed this kick in or change anything. It does have Makita's auto start wireless system, which means it's connected via Bluetooth to one of their AWS dust collection systems, which means as soon as you turn it on the vacuum system works as well. It uses a 165mm blade, and the one that's on it at the moment, which is fairly new, I've found to cut really cleanly and very well. It doesn't come with a guide rail, but you can get it in a package that contains guide rails and clamps. And bare, without any batteries, is just under £400. Obviously one of its main selling points is that it's battery operated, so therefore you don't have any cord, which I must say does make a big difference. It's similar to using a cordless drill versus a corded drill. But having said that, I've not found any lack of power at all. In fact, with the new blade and the battery is reasonably charged, this cuts through material as if it's 240 volt with a cable. With that size blade, it's got a 56mm maximum depth cut. I've been using it on the same track as the Parkside plunge saw, which it works on absolutely fine. Obviously, you need to change the splinter guard for the new setup. And it's got a couple of features which I really like. The first of which is the soft start function, which I assume goes hand in hand with that brushless motor. And you would have heard it there. It also has an electronic brake. So as soon as you take your finger off, it slows down really quickly. That's really quite fast. I quite like the idea of having variable speed as well. It's just a number on the back here, a bit like some of the routers, and you'll see that as I can turn it up and down while it's running. That's full. That's quite slow. I've been using it on number 4, whatever that is. It's probably around about 5,000 RPM, which seems to work for everything, all the cutting that I've done. The other thing I quite like about it is it actually has a scribe function if you're cutting melamine. Let me show you. So there's a little button around the back here that if you actually push in, it limits how deep the saw can actually extend. It stops it when the teeth are just protruding a few millimeters past the guide rail. So that means it can scribe the surface of something like melamine, and then as you pull it out for the second pass, then you can go all the way through. Let me just show you in a real life example. So there you go, that is the first cut, which is only about maybe 2 or 3 millimeters deep. And it's absolutely a perfect cut. Absolutely no splinter at all. So the second pass, then you can go all the way through. Let's do that. Obviously you mustn't move the guide rail between the two, and it's probably best if you're going to do this to clamp it down so you get no movement. But I'll show you how you do it from the second pass as well. Let me just set this up. See, hopefully I won't move the guide rail. So the first pass is a scoring cut and the second pass is a full depth cut. There you go. So there you go, that is a really, really crisp cut. Probably the best cut that I've seen on melamine from any tool as well. So if you're going to be putting in kitchens or doing any sort of work with wardrobes or something like that, that is quite a good function. The one thing that does surprise me is that its depth stopper doesn't show you the depth once it's on a guide rail. Let me show you. This stopper here that tells you how deep it's going to cut essentially just tells you how deep it cuts lower than the base plate, not the guide rail. For that you need to add on at least another 5mm because the guide rail is 5mm thick. So if you wanted to just about cut through a 20mm piece of material, you've got to set this to 25 if you're using a guide rail, which is different to my cheap Parkside, which actually tells you two different depths cut. One is without the guide rail and the other one is with the guide rail, and they're just set sort of 5mm between. So if you've got a guide rail and you want to cut 40mm, then you just set this to be 40, which is around about there, and without the guide rail you'll end up cutting 45. So that surprises me for an expensive machine that it hasn't got that same function on as the cheaper machine. I know that all you have to do is add 5mm to it, and once you've worked that out, then you obviously naturally just do it in your head all the time. But I'm just surprised that while they're using this sort of system, why they don't just add two numbers there, one for without the guide rail and one for with the guide rail. So you would have seen me use this over the last few weeks on a number of items, whether it be showing you how to make a jig so you can get repeat cuts with a plunge saw, and also on 12mm ply when I was making some boxes for the workshop. And on each occasion, I think it's performed absolutely great. It's been a pleasure to use it, and a significant difference to the cheaper Parkside. Not just the fact that it doesn't have a cable, although that does help, not dragging a cable around. Although you've still got the hose for the dust collection, not having a cable really does help. But it's just been a pleasure to use. And the best analogy I can come up with describing these two machines is your Parkside, your cheap and cheerful Parkside, is your 1 litre Ford Fiesta. It'll get you there without any fuss and is sort of reliable, but don't expect any sort of bells and whistles or for you to really enjoy the drive too much. Whereas your 36V Makita is more like your 2.8 automatic Granada. It's a pleasure to drive, it works really well, and it just is more fun to use than the cheaper Parkside. That scoring cut is absolutely perfect, and it's just a pleasure to hold in your hand all the bits that you feel all nicely and rubberized, and it just works really, really well and sounds great as well. So what I would say is, if you're going to be using a machine like this regularly, or you're using it to install kitchens, then definitely you will appreciate the more expensive Makita, not only because it's cordless, but just because of the functions and the way it feels in your hand and the way it operates. However, if you're only going to be using a saw like this a few times a year, there's no point in spending almost £400 on something like this Makita when you can get away with something like £100 on a Parkside. Just be aware that you're probably not getting the best out of your cuts, and you're still driving the Ford Fiesta of the range. Whereas if you do have some money and you're using this sort of machine regularly, then it's an absolute pleasure to use something like this Makita. But having used it for the last few weeks, I must say I really, really like it. And I've decided that one way or the other, I'm going to get my hands on one of these in the near future, which means this Parkside version is unfortunately going to get relegated to the shelf and sit there getting dusty over the next couple of years, I'm sure. I hope you enjoyed this video and it's helped you decide whether you should invest in something a little bit more professional than your basic model. I will see you next time.